Over a year after Boko Haram kidnapped hundreds of young women, the Bring Back Our Girls campaign is still going strong. The U.S. government opens an investigation into the killing of Zimbabwe's beloved lion Cecil. And Special Olympics athletes arrive to compete and make friends from around the world. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Lenore Mudu. This is Africa 54. Vincent McCurry is off today. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari's vow to destroy extremist militants is proving to be quite difficult, as residents in northeastern Nigeria were again the victims of a deadly bombing attack. At least 5 people are dead in Maiduguri after a suicide bomber struck Gamboru Market on Friday. Witnesses say a number of people were injured in the blast. Although no one has claimed responsibility for the attack, the region is a hotbed of Boko Haram activity. The terrorists have carried out a string of assaults in the area that have killed hundreds in recent weeks. Meanwhile, Nigeria's army says it has rescued 59 women, children and elderly men who were held hostage by Boko Haram. Last year, they raided a school in Chibok and kidnapped nearly 300 schoolgirls. More than 200 of the girls are still missing. Boko Haram has been carrying out a violent campaign of terrorism in its quest to turn Nigeria into a hardcore Islamic state. And over a year later, various campaigns and missions have been set up to rescue and return these girls to their homes. The most widely known campaign, Bring Back Our Girls, is trending consistently on social media and is tweeted worldwide. Jacqueline Gross has our story.
Representatives from the U.S. Congress, supporters of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, and others recently gathered at the U.S. Capitol to talk about the Chibok girls, pray and spread awareness and hope that the girls will be rescued. The rally coincided with the visit to the White House by Nigeria's newly elected President Muhammadu Buhari.
Yes, our objective is to get those girls safe and sound back to their schools, back to their parents, and try to mentally rehabilitate them, having gone through the shock they went through. I think Nigeria will make as much sacrifice as humanly possible.
Wear Something Red Wednesdays to support the Bring Back Our Girls campaign is a growing trend. Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, the organizer of this press conference, brought inspiring speakers and was able to share her message.
We want him to know that we're willing partners in helping to stamp out Boko Haram and to find the Chibok girls that were kidnapped over a year ago from their boarding school.
U.S. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee came as a mother and spoke with intensity about the kidnapped Chibok girls.
And so what we're saying today is that we will join the forever committed and the never to forget. We will continue to fight for these beautiful girls. Why? Because they deserve a future. They deserve a life.
After being seized, the girls were reportedly forced to convert to Islam, learn to fight, and marry the Boko Haram fighters. Of the 276 kidnapped girls, approximately 53 have escaped. Rebecca Ganzama, a Nigerian woman, took it upon herself to put pressure on the government.
It all boils down to government not really, especially the past region, not really knowing what are the primary responsibilities, regardless of whether people trusted them as a government or not, to have taken it over. And then two, there was so much, I can't say whether mystery or lack of, the government couldn't believe that this is true. And that was what pushed us as a family to start doing something and we took opportunity of the congressmen to increase their pressure on the government.
President Barack Obama has regularly offered support to Nigeria in the fight against Boko Haram, and he again did so in his meeting with President Buhari, who in turn says he is prepared to defeat the insurgents. Jacqueline Gross for VOA News, Capitol Hill, Washington.
Initial results of Ebola vaccine known as VSV-ZEBOV indicate an efficacy of 100% in protecting people against Ebola with minimal side effects. The results, which have been released by the World Health Organization, are from a clinical trial started in Guinea in March this year to test the safety, efficacy, and capacity substance to provoke an immune response of the vaccine. The trial was implemented by Guinea and supported by a broad partnership of international and national organizations. MSF Medical Director Dr. Bertrand Draguet says the preliminary results of the VSV-ZEBOV Ebola vaccine are encouraging, but cautions that more analysis and research is needed. VOA's Carol Pearson recently interviewed Norwegian researcher Jo Arne Rottenen about the vaccine.
Of course, no vaccines, if you really test them on thousands or millions of individuals, they will not necessarily be 100% effective. But we should, of course, say that this is the signal we get and the data we get from the interim results so far is that this vaccine is fully protective. So based on the number of individuals and cases we see, there is 100% protection in those vaccinated.
Joining us in the studio is VOA's Carol Pearson, who has been following the story closely. Carol, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
So you spoke to the Norwegian researcher. What else did he tell you in terms of the efficacy of this vaccine?
Well, as you heard, he just said it was 100% effective. The Lancet article says it's 75%, but there's a huge variation. 10,000 people have gotten this vaccine so far, not just in Africa, but they first had to make sure that it was absolutely safe. You don't want to give a vaccine to somebody that will make them sick. So they tried it out in the United States, in Europe, and then when they had a major trial in Liberia after they found out that it was safe and they were able to figure out what dose was the most effective and safest dose to give.
So we are hearing minimum side effects to no side effect. Tell us about that.
In one of the trials, before it was released, were given to a number of people, there was some joint pain or something like that, and they decided to reduce the amount of the vaccine or the action agent in the vaccine, and that reduced the side effects. So they have been giving this now. The Public Health Norway looked at Guinea. The U.S. National Institutes of Health was working in Liberia. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Protection was working in Sierra Leone, and nobody was working in Guinea. So that's why the Norwegian Public Health Organization decided this is where we're going to go.
And the trials were conducted with volunteers. Now, when will it be available? Do we have a time frame in terms of the process before we get to its release?
There is still no licensed vaccine. But because this is so effective, and licensing takes time, and you have to go through all these processes. So instead of doing that, what they're going to do is continue the study until there are no more cases of Ebola in West Africa.
Now, this vaccine, quickly, we know that there are 4 strains of the Ebola. What strain does this one cover?
Zaire, the Zaire strain.
Okay.
And that is a very deadly strain, as we know from watching this outbreak.
Absolutely. Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. And that was VOA's Carol Pearson joining us. More on Ebola. It's been 1 year since Sierra Leone declared the Ebola virus a national emergency. In September 2014, the United Nations created a temporary system to meet the immediate needs in the fight against the deadly virus, which has killed more than 11,000 people across West Africa. It was known as UNMIR, or the United Nations Mission for the Ebola Emergency Response. But now the response team is winding down in Sierra Leone amid concerns about a cluster of possible new cases. The World Health Organization will, however, take over UNMIR's role to ensure the fight against Ebola does not lose momentum. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has opened a probe into the killing of a beloved lion earlier this month in Zimbabwe by an American dentist who is accused of the slaying and who remains in hiding. The agency announced the investigation via Twitter on Thursday and says it has been unsuccessful in locating the dentist, Walter Palmer, of Eden Prairie, Minnesota. It also called the killing of Cecil the lion tragic. The Safari Club International, an international hunting group, says it supports the probe and has suspended the memberships of Palmer and his hunting guide in Zimbabwe. The White House is set to review a public petition to extradite Palmer, noting the petition has exceeded the required 100,000 signatures. Spokesman Josh Earnest says it's up to the Justice Department to respond to an extradition order.
And so it sounds as though this particular petition has reached that threshold, and so there will be a forthcoming White House response.
A source close to the case told the Reuters news service that the Fish and Wildlife Service is investigating the killing of Cecil the lion under U.S. law that bars the trading of wildlife that has been illegally killed, transported, or sold. Now, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, as Barack Obama's term winds down, well, a look at his presidential legacy. Stay with us.
From science and technology, here's what's new.
What's new? How about 1.7 million videos, all recently posted on YouTube, courtesy of the Associated Press and AP's British Movie Tone channel. 1943, World War II, and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
We are far better prepared to endure the worst malice of Hitler and his Huns.
1974, Muhammad Ali at his rhyming best before fighting George Foreman in the country then known as Zaire.
Ali fights great. He's got speed and endurance. If you decide to fight him, increase your insurance.
1990, Movie Tone is there when Nelson Mandela walks out of a South African prison.
Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man, taking his first steps into a new South Africa.
World history through the cameras of the Associated Press, the world's largest and oldest news agency. For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Grosshans.
President Obama this week completed a historic trip to Africa. Kenya, the birthplace of his father, was an especially significant stop for Mr. Obama, who is dedicating the remaining year and a half of his presidency to establishing a legacy that observers say is still too premature to define. VOA White House correspondent Luis Ramirez has more.
A trip to his father's native land seemed to culminate a streak of victories that the president had scored back home, including the signing of a historic Iran nuclear deal.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not: a comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
But pundits call the deal a gamble. How history judges Mr. Obama will depend on Iran.
If Iran does break out and does have nuclear weapons, and it even, if they even decide to attack an adversary or anybody, obviously that's a huge black mark on President Obama, his legacy. All of these negotiations will be seen clearly as a failure, and he won't ever be able to overcome that.
Among his foreign policy successes was the killing of Osama bin Laden, the end of U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, and staying out of new conflicts. But the rise of the Islamic State militant group puts his Middle East legacy into question.
The reality is that when he leaves the White House in 2017, the Middle East is going to look much worse than when he came in 2008. Much worse right now. And he, fairly or unfairly, is going to get blamed for being too risk-averse and not being assertive enough.
He surprised many by restoring ties with communist Cuba.
A year ago, it might have seemed impossible that the United States would once again be raising our flag, the Stars and Stripes, over an embassy in Havana. This is what change looks like.
But the changes may not be enough to seal a great legacy, says Aaron David Miller, author of the book The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President.
A historic president? Absolutely. An undeniably great president along the lines of Washington in the 18th, Lincoln in the 19th, and FDR in the 20th? No. So the question is, what space will he occupy in the pantheon of 43 different presidents? That's right now very difficult to say.
Domestically, his election as the nation's first black president was historic. Many Americans credit him for steering the nation away from economic collapse after the biggest downturn since the Great Depression. And he pushed through Obamacare, the largest health care reform law in U.S. history. Yet his election has far from signaled the end of racism in the United States. At a eulogy honoring one of 9 people killed in a racist attack in South Carolina recently, Mr. Obama said no one should expect a transformation of race relations overnight. In what's been called one of the most poignant moments of his presidency, he led the congregation in singing a Christian hymn.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
That transformation, like much of Mr. Obama's legacy, may not be fully evident for years to come. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, at the White House.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry launches a 5-nation tour on Friday in a bid to strengthen economic and security ties and ease concerns about the Iran nuclear deal. In Southeast Asia, he will visit Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. But as VOA State Department correspondent Pam Dawkins explains, Kerry will begin his trip in the Middle East.
In a bid to strengthen engagement with U.S. allies, Secretary of State John Kerry will meet with his counterparts in Egypt and Qatar. His trip to Cairo comes at a time when the United States and Egypt have been working to mend relations strained by U.S. opposition to Egypt's repression of supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. The two countries will host a strategic dialogue focusing on political, economic, and security issues.
The real challenge for Secretary Kerry in his meetings in Egypt is how to discuss the regional picture, the regional fight against terrorism, and the domestic situation in Egypt, and how the two fit together.
In Qatar, Kerry will meet with Gulf Cooperation Council members who have raised concerns about the Iran nuclear deal, similar to concerns raised by Capitol Hill lawmakers who questioned Kerry this week.
And we have a right to protect the American citizens from this disaster, this country having nuclear power. And sanctions have worked.
Some analysts say the nuclear deal could benefit Gulf countries.
Seems to me if I lived in the Gulf, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with Iran backed off from nuclear weapons and not being able to pursue them for 10 or 15 years than I would without the deal.
Serber says he's not sure Kerry will be able to allay concerns of Gulf allies who fear the deal will be destabilizing in their region. Pam Dawkins, VOA News, the State Department.
International investigators are on the way to a tiny Indian Ocean island to determine if the plane wreckage that had drifted ashore is from the missing Malaysian Boeing 777 airliner that disappeared last March during a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. If so, the debris found on Reunion Island could help solve the aircraft's mysterious disappearance with 239 people on board. VOA's Latika Hawk reports.
This piece of wreckage covered in shells and other marine life could be a piece of the Malaysian plane that disappeared 17 months ago on flight MH370. The debris was found Wednesday on Reunion, a French overseas territory in the Western Indian Ocean. Aviation experts are already getting clues from the photographs of the wreckage.
With my team, we just looked at hundreds and thousands of pictures. We just tried to figure out which plane it could belong to. We found only one match. It was the flaperon of a Boeing 777. And not only the shape match, but also all the connections and all the holes that are very specific for this kind of pieces of plane.
And they say the ocean currents could have brought the wreckage to this part of the Indian Ocean.
Finding this piece of debris in Reunion Island is entirely consistent with the current patterns in the southern Indian Ocean to being originated from the area that they're doing the current search for the wreckage at the bottom of the ocean.
Scientists say more pieces of wreckage could be washing up in that region. If the debris proves to be from the missing plane, experts say they may be able to determine why it went down.
We'll be able to look at it, see is there anything like an explosion mark, anything that might tell us why this airplane came down.
The answers may also give closure to the families of the passengers and crew. Zlatica Ho, VOA News, Washington.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, the thrill of competition at the Special Olympics. We'll be right back.
This lion, they baited the lion. Ego. Ego.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here is what's trending. Whether it's on a phone, a tablet, a laptop, or a TV, the way in which people consume digital content is changing as fast as the devices they use. At online video extravaganza VidCon in California, the rules are changing quickly, and it's the young, tech-savvy content creators who are rewriting them. VidCon is an annual celebration of online video, including YouTube, Twitch, Vine, and Instagram. Their conference features live streaming panel talks about how companies and creators make money through online video, plus plenty of starstruck selfie takers. Next up, outdoor dining has never been more popular among Los Angeles' fashionable crowd. Southern California's weather makes it the perfect place to dine al fresco, but consumers are shunning the sidewalk tables because of the busy roads and heading inside for a different style of outdoor dining. This summer, the places to be seen eating out are on stylish patios and rooftop terraces, some stretching more than 400 square meters. Inside is largely reserved for the chefs while diners take in the Hollywood views. And finally, another big score for Netflix. Cambodia helped Angelina Jolie become a film superstar and start a family. To tell the stories of people in the country that touched her, she's directing a Netflix film on location based on a memoir of the country's 1970s political and humanitarian crisis under the communist Khmer Rouge. Her Cambodian-born son Medax will help with research and preparation for the film. She's slated to begin filming in November on the Netflix project, an adaptation of First They Killed My Father, A Daughter of Cambodia Remembers, by Long Ong. And that's what's trending today. It's time for our sports report. Sonny Young is off today. The Special Olympics World Games are underway in Los Angeles, and the competition for people with intellectual disabilities has drawn thousands of athletes from around the world. As Mike O'Sullivan reports, some will take home medals, and all are experiencing the thrill of competition.
Some of these athletes from 165 countries will go home with gold, silver, and bronze medals. But whether they do or not, fans and families are here to cheer them on and say they're all winners. This athlete's aunt is celebrating his gold in the 400-meter race.
He's Daniel Wolf, he's my nephew.
And he's carrying on a tradition.
My grandfather won a gold in the 1936 games, Freddie Wolf, so it's amazing.
Freddie Wolf, the great-grandfather of a Special Olympics athlete, won a 4x400 relay gold medal at the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games, seen here on YouTube. Many of these athletes came from halfway around the world. Hafed Gritli of the Libyan delegation says the journey has not been easy.
And especially from the place from where we came. Actually, it has been a hard trip to be here to Los Angeles.
But he says the games are good.
Compared to the Olympics and Paralympics, because I have been 6 times to the Olympics and Paralympics, it's almost the same standards, so it's wonderful here.
The athletes are having fun as they compete.
Yeah, they're really enjoying it, yes. And they're really excited about the games, and they're giving their full energy to the games.
Special Olympics athletes say they have gained a sense of accomplishment whether or not they go home with a medal. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
We end our show today with a Washington, D.C.-based band with African connections. Kino Musica is a 6-piece group that draws inspiration from across Africa and its diaspora. The group's members are from the East African and Latino communities. Their creative sound is a mix of Ethiopian melodies over Afro-Latino rhythm. VOA's Jackson Mvunganyi attended one of their jam sessions and brings us this recording. Enjoy the music and good night from Washington.
Music is something that brings people together.
Music educates, it motivates, it's a bridge.
Music.
Alley.
On.
VOA.
qubanaha VOA waxaan ku soo gudbinnaa qubanayaal goosgoos ah oo xiiso badan oo ku saabsan arrimaha Soomaaliya, Maraykanka iyo caalamkaba.
haddaba qubanaha VOA-da kala soco website-keena voasomali.com.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Technology Report.
I'm Milar Sega. I'm the host of VOA's The Correspondents.
A roundup of the world's top stories.
Here's a false choice in more ways than one.
We can't actually put you there, but we can come pretty close. In 30 minutes, we'll show you the world.